Confucius once said, "In learning and straightway practicing, is there not pleasure also?" That quote opens chapter 1 of book 1 of the Analects. The Analects is the collection of sayings by Confucius. Hi, I'm Michael Allen Prestwood, and this is Confucius and the Analects, His Teachings, No Doubt. This video is based on the article of the same name available at touchstonetruth.com. One of the myths out there is that Confucius did not write the Analects, and while technically true, that's the wrong nuance. I created this video to help set the record straight. This fast-paced video covers 4 things: the life of Confucius, ancient oral traditions, the 2 schools of Confucius, and the first 3 sayings of the Analects. Part 1. Confucius. Confucius was born as Kong Chu in 551 BCE. Confucius is his later Latin name. By tradition, it is believed that Confucius was a philosopher from a very young age. When you hear "by tradition" in ancient history, it means the information is considered likely true, or roughly accurate, but lacks sufficient evidence to be definitively stated. In science, we can repeatedly verify ideas about nature, but with history, we rely on evidence, logic, and existing stories. Some stories must be true, so historians evaluate the plausibility. Is the history plausible, and does it create a coherent narrative? Most authors solidly use 551 BCE as the birth year of Confucius because it is widely accepted. For Laozi, however, most add about or circa to the 604 BCE birth year, because the date is really just a traditional guess. Ultimately, it's up to the author, but when you see qualifiers like about circa and by tradition, that means evidence is a bit lacking. The technical term for this is verisimilitude, a fancy word used to describe narratives or interpretations that align closely with the available evidence and seem plausible, even if they can't be fully proven. Also, by tradition, Confucius, or Kong Kui, began his career as a teacher, sharing his knowledge and philosophical ideas with eager students. Later, he transitioned into various administrative roles, from managing public granaries to overseeing construction projects, where he earned a reputation for being diligent, fair, and efficient. This is likely when the majority of his core ideology took shape. Around the year 498 BCE, conflicted and unsatisfied at about age 53, Confucius returned to his true passion, teaching and philosophy. After leaving government service, he spent nearly 2 decades traveling and teaching. He continued to teach until his death in 479 BCE at the age of 72. While I'm sure he took great satisfaction in teaching his disciples, despite holding various government positions and advising rulers, he did not attain the level of influence he desired. After his death, over the next few centuries, his teachings would spread, slowly. Its heyday really started centuries later when the Han Dynasty, which started in 206 BCE. They adopted his teachings around 136 BCE as the official state ideology. It became part of the new normal for Chinese culture across dynasties. His ideas left a lasting impression on Chinese society and countless individuals over the centuries. If you're familiar with my holistic eudaimonia, this is yet another reminder to live life in a way that sends positive ripples into a future you will never know. Although writing existed during this time, and Confucius referenced ancient Chinese texts like the Book of Documents. This is the first page of the Book of Documents. This one was printed in 1279. He also referenced the Book of Songs. This version is 900 CE to 1100 CE. However, during the time of Confucius, it was still largely a time of oral tradition. Before writing systems emerged, humanity relied on a rich oral tradition that stretched back at least 50,000 years. By that time, our cognitive abilities were certainly on par with those of modern humans, but it's likely that oral traditions reach much further into our past. perhaps back to the common ancestor of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, around 440,000 years ago, maybe even earlier. Here is your first takeaway. The oral tradition was the way for humanity until writing systems took over. In that tradition, Confucius taught, and yes, you can rely on it. Oral traditions were very precise. They were more than just storytelling. They were an honorable and highly precise method of passing down knowledge. In early human societies, any variation in the transmission of stories or teachings would have been met with resistance. Cultural mechanisms, such as memorization techniques and strict adherence to accuracy, ensured that these traditions were preserved over generations. While different disciples might have emphasized slightly different interpretations of his teachings, the core of his wisdom was preserved with care and reverence. And yes, this is how we received many of the ancient Eastern texts. They all began as carefully preserved oral traditions, passed down with precision and respect. In China, Taoism, Confucianism, Mohism, and legalism were all passed down orally. By the way, this also includes Indian traditions, including Hinduism's ancient Vedic roots, Buddhism, and others. Heck, even Zoroastrianism in Persia. These masters were very educated, and it's very likely at least some of them wrote things down. But writing books or courseware to transmit teachings to a new generation was not the way for humanity for so long. While some of these masters might have written down their teachings, the oral tradition was the way, and it's how their ideas survived for centuries. As a final thought, I often wonder how many masters all over the globe created wonderfully fascinating oral traditions that were taught and endured for centuries, maybe even for millennia, only to be lost to the sands of time long before the written word, long before history. After Gautama Buddha died, two schools of Buddhism emerged as dominant schools over the next few centuries, the Theravada and Mahayana traditions. While these two schools differ in their overall approach, their core teachings honor the original Gautama Buddha. The same thing happened to Confucius. After his death, over about 5 generations, two schools of Confucianism emerged as dominant, Mengzi and Xunzi. This is the 3rd century BCE, about a century after Confucius. Mengzi, like Theravada for Buddhism, is often considered the most faithful interpretation of Confucius. Mengzi, or the Latinized Mencius, emphasizes the inherent goodness of human nature and the belief in the moral potential of all individuals. It focuses on compassion, righteousness, and the need for benevolent leadership. Xunzi, the other influential Confucian school, taught that humans are naturally selfish and that moral cultivation through education and ritual is necessary to achieve goodness. His approach emphasizes strict adherence to social order and discipline. Over the next few generations, it is fair to say that Confucian scholars adopted the Mencius tradition and blended elements from existing schools into the broader Confucian tradition we know today. Xunzi had an influence on Confucianism, but much of his ideas, particularly his view that humans are selfish, were absorbed into legalism. Unlike Buddhism, which has several distinct traditions today, Confucianism evolved into a unified tradition. Of course, ideas being ideas, scholars will forever debate the interpretation of his teachings. Part 4. The Analects. The teachings of Confucius were faithfully kept alive by his disciples using the oral tradition after his death. It is a collection of about 500 Confucius sayings. By about 150 BCE, these sayings were organized into the collection of 20 short books we recognize today. On average, each book contains around 25 chapters. Each chapter is a saying, which can be as short as a simple sentence or as long as 10 lines, but rarely much longer than that. In 30 Philosophers, I introduce Confucianism as an applied philosophy. Applied philosophies deal with the question of how to live life, which is perhaps the most important question in philosophy. And Confucianism is a good example of an applied philosophy that stresses the virtues of discipline, duty, and honor to yourself, your family, and your community. In Chapter 4, I use it to introduce the concepts of normal, abnormal, and schemas. When you use an applied philosophy to improve your life, what you're really doing is creating a new normal. To me, the real value of Confucianism is realized when you think about his advice from the philosophical viewpoint of normalcy. Now let's conclude this video by looking at the first 3 sayings. In the following quote from his Book 1, Chapter 1 of the Analects, Confucius highlights the importance of putting newfound wisdom into practice, as it leads to personal growth and self-improvement. Here is Book 1, Chapter 1. The Master said, "In learning and straightway practicing, is there not pleasure also? Is it not a joy to have friends come from afar? Is it not gentlemanly not to take offense when others fail to appreciate your abilities?" Here is your takeaway. Confucius teaches us 3 core values: find joy in learning, cherish friendships, and practice humility. Education isn't just a tool for success, it's a lifelong journey that brings fulfillment when we put what we learn into action. Next, he reminds us of the value of relationships, especially when those who share our ideas and ideals come together. The joy of meaningful connection is a cornerstone of his philosophy. Lastly, humility. Confucius tells us that true nobility lies not in seeking external validation, but in being at peace with one's own character and accomplishments, regardless of whether others recognize them. Book 1, Chapter 2 continues with this emphasis on morality and societal order. The Master said, "It is rare to find a man who is filial and respectful to his elders, but likes to defy his superiors. And there has never been one who likes to defy his superiors and is fond of causing disorder." Here is your takeaway. Confucius shows us that respect for elders and authority starts at home and is the key to a harmonious society. Build moral character within your family, and it will ripple out into the world. And now for Book 1, Chapter 3. The Master said, "A clever tongue and a fine appearance are rarely signs of goodness." Here is your takeaway. Confucius reminds us that true goodness isn't about appearances or fancy words, it's about actions. Virtue comes from within and is revealed through how we live, not how we look or speak. Though Confucius lived over 2,500 years ago, his insights remain profoundly relevant today. I'm Michael Allen Prestwood, and I hope this video has inspired you to continue to walk the path laid out by Confucius, a path of wisdom, self-improvement, and humble virtue. For the full story of how Confucianism fits in with human thought, get my new book, 30 Philosophers. It tells the story of our best ideas over the last 5,000 years. Thanks for watching. Please like this video. If you are new here, please subscribe and join our community of thinkers at touchstonetruth.com.